November 18th, 1942 skies over Henderson Field, Guadalcanal. An anonymous Japanese Zero pilot tightened his grip on the control stick, his eyes fixed on a formation of strange, twin-tailed American fighters climbing rapidly from Henderson Field. On this day, the aviators of the 339 Fighter Squadron would enter history, becoming the first Lightning pilots to challenge Japanese fighters in combat. The sight was unsettling. Two engines, twin booms, climbing with an urgency that seemed almost unnatural. Later, when the shaken pilot reported to his commander at Rabaul, his words carried the weight of revelation. The first cracks in 3 years of unchallenged Japanese air dominance. Through his canopy, he had just witnessed a contradiction of everything the Imperial Navy's doctrine had drilled into its pilots. The Americans' new aircraft, the Lockheed P-38 Lightning, mocked by Japanese intelligence as heavy and unwieldy, had risen from sea level to combat height faster than his Mitsubishi A6M0 could ever hope to match. For months, the Zero had enjoyed supremacy. In China, in the Philippines, at Pearl Harbor, it had ruled the skies with unmatched climb rate and turning agility. But here, over the blood-stained island of Guadalcanal, American pilots in these unorthodox twin-engine machines were dictating the fight from heights the Zero struggled to reach. That day, the P-38s of the 339 Squadron scored 3 victories, swooping from superior altitude to strike. The Zero's legendary maneuverability, once feared across the Pacific, meant nothing against opponents who refused to fight on its terms. The mathematics of air combat had shifted. Supremacy was no longer defined by tight turns at low altitudes, but by raw power, speed, and height. And in those dimensions, the Americans now held the edge. For the Japanese, this was the beginning of a painful realization. The age of the Zero's invincibility was ending. Japanese pilot Lieutenant Commander Tadashi Nakajima once described his frustration, trying desperately to line up on the tail of an enemy fighter, only to be blindsided by another Grumman diving in from the flank. Forced to break away in anger and retreat to Rabaul, he realized that the days of straightforward dogfights were fading. If encounters with wildcats were difficult, what followed with the arrival of the P-38 Lightning would be far worse. Even Saburō Sakai, Japan's most celebrated ace, would later confess that Zero fighters stood little chance against the Lightning except under rare and highly favorable conditions. His admission carried enormous weight among Japan's flying community. The reality was grim. The P-38's operational range gave it presence anywhere in the Pacific. With drop tanks extending its reach to 1,600 miles, the Lightning could escort bombers deep into enemy territory, conduct long-range sweeps, and appear unexpectedly where Japanese pilots once believed themselves safe. The most famous proof came with Operation Vengeance. On April 18, 1943, 16 Lightnings launched a daring 435-mile interception to eliminate Admiral Yamamoto. Flying at wave-top height to avoid detection, Major John Mitchell's squadron climbed at the precise moment needed to ambush Yamamoto's formation. 6 Zero escorts could not save him. The precision, range, and sheer boldness of the operation sent shockwaves through Japan's naval air arm. Their revered commander had been tracked, intercepted, and killed at the edge of American range. By mid-1943, U.S. pilots had refined Lightning tactics into the deadly boom-in-zoom style, diving from altitude, firing, and climbing back to safety before the Zero could respond. In the first large-scale clash, 15 Japanese aircraft fell for the loss of just 1 Lightning. The imbalance would only grow as the months passed. Japan's efforts to adapt, new formations, dive breaks, and attempts to drag P-38s into low-altitude turning duels failed repeatedly. The gap in performance was too wide, and behind the machine itself stood an industrial reality Japan could not match. By war's end, more than 10,000 P-38s will be built across 18 evolving variants, each one addressing weaknesses and enhancing strengths. The P-38J, for example, introduced hydraulically boosted ailerons and improved high-altitude performance. Japanese engineers, still tied to incremental Zero modifications, could not keep pace. As the machines advanced, the pilots diverged even further. Japan's veteran ranks thinned, and rush training programs produced replacements with less than 200 flight hours. Their American counterparts entered combat with double or triple that experience, thorough gunnery practice, and specialized training for twin-engine fighters. For the Japanese, every dogfight became a gamble against opponents with better equipment, better preparation, and a seemingly endless supply of replacements. The Lightning's twin-engine design meant even badly damaged aircraft often limped home, while the fragile Zero turned every bullet hit into a death sentence. By late 1943, Japanese intelligence circulated chilling warnings: avoid direct combat with the P-38 unless overwhelming superiority could be achieved. This instruction, a stark reversal of the aggressive code of the Imperial Navy, signaled a collapse of confidence. Meanwhile, American aces rose quickly. Richard Bong scored 40 victories in Lightnings, Thomas Maguire 38. Between them and others, over 1,800 Japanese aircraft fell to P-38 guns in the Pacific. Each loss meant not just another destroyed plane, but another irreplaceable veteran gone. As 1944 advanced, new Lightning models carried more power, rockets, and bombs, shifting effortlessly from air superiority to ground attack. To Japanese pilots, it was no longer just a fighter. It was an all-purpose weapon system. What unsettled them most, however, was cultural. Japanese aviators believed victory came from skill and spirit. Americans, by contrast, treated air combat as a problem to be engineered and solved, with better machines, tactics, and constant innovation. Reports of Lightning dominance were often met in Tokyo with demands for greater willpower, but on the front lines, the truth was undeniable. Courage alone could not level the skies. For too long, Japanese air doctrine equated courage with capability. Pilots were told that spirit and aerobatic skill would prevail, even as the reality of modern warfare proved otherwise. While American aviators refined tactics after every battle, Japanese training remained trapped in outdated traditions, emphasizing acrobatics and one-on-one duels, skills irrelevant against an opponent who refused to fight on those terms. By 1944, the technological gulf widened further. Some Lightning squadrons were now equipped with primitive airborne radar, giving them the ability to stalk targets at night. Darkness, once Japan's sanctuary, had become another battlefield. The ultimate consequence of attrition appeared in June 1944 at the Battle of the Philippine Sea, the infamous Marianas Turkey Shoot. Though P-38s were not present, their earlier battles had already thinned out Japan's veteran ranks. When Hellcats met Japan's carriers, they faced green pilots with little training. Over 300 Japanese aircraft were destroyed in a single day for minimal American losses. Vice Admiral Saburō Sakai would later confess that Japan's pilots were never prepared. The war in the skies had already been lost. As defeat loomed, desperation bred strange tactics. Kamikaze ramming attacks were ordered, phosphorus shells were designed in hopes of igniting Lightning fuel tanks, and twin-engine projects like the Kawasaki Ki-102 were rushed into service. None of it worked. The Ki-102 arrived in 1945, too slow, too unreliable, and too few in number. By the final year of the war, Japanese aviators no longer spoke of superiority. They spoke only of survival. Even Saburō Sakai admitted that the Lightning had crushed the Zero pilots' morale. The numbers told the truth with brutal clarity. Over 1,800 Japanese aircraft destroyed by P-38s. Major Richard Bong, 40 kills, all in Lightnings. Major Thomas Maguire, 38 kills, also in Lightnings. P-38 squadrons claimed more victories in the Pacific than any other U.S. Army Air Force fighter. Against this, Japan's losses were catastrophic. By 1945, 90% of the pilots who began the war were gone. Their replacements had less than 100 flight hours, men sent to die, not to fight. After the surrender, interviews with surviving Japanese officers revealed just how devastating the Lightning had been. Commander Masatake Okumiya admitted, "The P-38 destroyed our confidence completely. It was not just faster or better armed. It represented a way of fighting we could not match." One pilot recalled his shock at the first encounter. "I could not believe an American plane could outrun, outclimb, and outdive our Zero. We thought it was the best in the world. The Lightning proved us wrong." Technical analysis after the war made the mismatch undeniable. The Zero's 332 miles per hour top speed, light armament, and lack of armor were relics of an earlier war. The Lightning, by contrast, soared above 400 miles per hour, reached ceilings of 44,000 feet, carried heavy firepower concentrated in its nose, and protected its pilots with armor and self-sealing tanks. It was a machine built for survival and dominance. Beyond technology, it was a story of industry. Lockheed produced over 10,000 Lightnings in the war, each one part of a constantly improving design cycle. Japan built a similar number of Zeros over a longer time, but with declining quality and no true modernization. American engines rolled off production lines with interchangeable parts, while Japanese mechanics hand-fitted engines that lacked reliability. The training gap was just as vast. American pilots entered combat with hundreds of hours, specialized twin-engine instruction, gunnery practice, and high-altitude preparation. Japanese trainees were rushed into cockpits with a fraction of that time, armed with slogans about spirit rather than real tactics. By 1944, they were lambs thrown against wolves. The Lightning forced a revolution in aerial combat. Traditional turning duels were obsolete. Instead, U.S. pilots perfected boom and zoom strikes, diving from altitude, blasting through formations, and climbing out before the enemy could react. Japanese countermeasures, layered patrols, cloud cover, and low-altitude traps proved useless against a fighter that could dictate every engagement. By the end, the Zero symbolized a vanished era of dogfighting, while the P-38 stood as a weapon of the industrial age, fast, powerful, versatile, and relentless. By 1944, the Lightning wasn't just winning battles, it was reshaping the entire psychology of air war. The mere outline of its twin-boom silhouette, glinting in the sun, became a weapon in itself. To Japanese pilots, it looked alien, unnatural, two planes with one pilot, as they bitterly nicknamed it. Rumors of P-38 patrols were enough to delay missions or force them to demand extra escorts. Fear of the Lightning often struck before a single shot was fired. And this wasn't just about duels in the sky. It was about strategy. Japan's military leaders had built their entire doctrine on the belief that sheer courage and superior spirit could overcome technological differences. The P-38 proved that belief was a fatal illusion. Speed, altitude, firepower, range, technology dictated every fight, and the Zero's warrior code could not bridge that gap. As conventional combat became hopeless, desperation set in. Japan shifted toward kamikaze attacks, pulled its few surviving veteran pilots back to defend the home islands, and poured resources into experimental miracle weapons. None of it changed reality. The Americans had seized the skies, and the Lightning had been at the spearhead of that shift. Even Japan's proudest institution, its naval aviation, crumbled under the pressure. Carrier air groups rebuilt after Midway were shattered again and again. By 1944, Japanese carriers sailed with half-trained, half-strength air wings. Admiral Saburō Sakai himself confessed before the Philippine Sea, "Our pilots are not ready. They can barely land, let alone fight Lightnings and Hellcats. We're sending them to certain death." The humiliation went deeper than combat losses. The Lightning's photo reconnaissance variants, unarmed, stripped down, but still untouchable, mapped nearly every Japanese base and position in the Pacific. Enemy commanders soon realized their every move was being watched, recorded, and analyzed by the same aircraft that dominated their skies. Even when the guns were silent, the P-38 was charting their defeat. After the war, surviving pilots admitted what propaganda had forbidden them to say. Commander Masatake Okumiya confessed, "The P-38 broke our confidence completely. We believed in our superiority, our training, our aircraft. The Lightning showed us we were wrong about everything." Saburō Sakai himself acknowledged that the P-38 had destroyed the morale of Zero pilots. For men raised to believe courage outweighed machines, it was a crushing lesson. The Lightning's constant upgrades only deepened the gap. Dive flaps solved its high-speed instability. Heating systems fixed freezing cockpits. Hydraulically boosted ailerons improved roll rate. The Japanese Zero of 1945 was nearly identical to the one that struck Pearl Harbor. The P-38 of 1945 was an entirely new beast, faster, tougher, deadlier. By war's end, the results were beyond dispute. The two highest-scoring American aces, Major Richard Bong and Major Thomas Maguire, had racked up 78 victories between them, all in P-38s. Against them, Japan's surviving top ace limped away with 64. The Lightning had not just outflown the Zero. It had buried an entire doctrine, and with it, the myth of Japanese air supremacy. For 6 long years, Japan's pilots measured their skill in victories. But by 1945, the arithmetic of attrition told a story they could not escape. Losses mounted faster than replacements, and the balance sheet of war bled red. The P-38's triumph over the Zero wasn't just about performance figures. It exposed a clash of worldviews. Japan had gambled on a short war, fought with spirit, where courage would compensate for scarcity. America had prepared for the opposite, a long, grinding conflict where industry, science, and mass production would decide the outcome. To Japanese aviators, meeting the Lightning was more than a tactical shock. It was the shattering of an entire belief system. They had trained to master aerobatics, to fight duels of skill and willpower. But the Lightning fought a different kind of war, at higher altitude, with greater speed, and with overwhelming firepower. No amount of bravery could change that equation. Behind every statistic lay human cost. Thousands of young pilots, barely trained, strapped into obsolete machines, went up knowing they would not return. Letters recovered after the war reveal their quiet resignation. One young man wrote to his mother before flying his final sortie, "Tomorrow I face the twin-tailed devils. They are faster, higher, beyond our reach. I will do my duty, but I know it is hopeless." He never came back. His story was not unique. It was multiplied by thousands. The Lightning's influence did not end with victory. It became a blueprint for future air power, shaping designs in both East and West. For Japan, the trauma of meeting the P-38 instilled a post-war determination to never again fall behind technologically. The lesson was clear. Spirit alone could not win modern wars. In the end, the Lightning didn't merely defeat Japanese aircraft. It dismantled an entire philosophy of combat. The Zero, which once symbolized invincibility, was reduced to obsolescence within 2 years. The warrior code that had defined Japanese aviation for a generation proved powerless against a machine born of factories, laboratories, and assembly lines. Saburō Sakai, Japan's most famous surviving ace, would later reflect, "The Lightning destroyed the spirit of the Zero pilot." His words captured more than the end of a fighter. It marked the death of an era. The P-38 Lightning was not just an airplane. It was the embodiment of America's industrial might, a twin-tailed messenger of modernity that ended the age of the samurai in the skies. At 400 miles an hour, from 30,000 feet, it delivered democracy's answer to empire, an answer no amount of courage could overcome.